I figured it out. Part 1, the charge. In the June of 2024, the defendant, me, released their work I Can't Stop Thinking About the SNL Totino Saga to marginal, critical, and commercial acclaim. Within the work, the defendant explored heteropessimism and the negative forces which composed and continue to compose a political lesbianism. The defendant did an okay job at this, I think. Almost a year later, an incendiary charge was submitted against the defendant via public comment under the Totino's video, so concrete in its proposition, the defendant had no choice but to take the proposition seriously and disprove it completely. The comment is as follows. We begin with the failure of the commenter. I can't tell, they write, launching the defendant into a space of unknowability. As the commenter continues on, they further the defendant's esoteric nature, their strange performance within the phrase, what species, removing the defendant from the boundaries of the human into something beyond. But the claim is not over, as the commenter does not wish to relegate the defendant as completely unknowable, completely foreign, but rather as a point of study, a point of possibility. In full, the commenter writes, I can't tell what species of lesbian you are.
Gigi?
My immediate reaction was rejection. I thought, I'm not a lesbian because I do not have a lesbian spirit. I don't meet the requirements. My gender isn't a match. I'd stick it at the bars. Then I thought, what is a lesbian spirit? Where is the essence of lesbianism, and where exactly do I branch off while my friends carry forward? Where is the definition that allows me to completely sever myself from the claim? So I conducted some interviews. How would you define lesbian?
Lesbian as a woman being attracted to a woman.
Part 2, What is a Woman? What is a Woman is a propaganda film that is censored on Letterboxd because of reasons. What is a woman?
Marry one and find out.
I don't know, JP. That kind of sounds a little postmodern to me. But also, I did more than just watch the miserable propaganda. We used to be a proper nation. What is a Woman? Sex, Gender, and the Body in Feminist Theory is a pretty long essay by Toro Moi. I forgot I read it, so I read it again. The first conclusion in the essay, as voiced by de Beauvoir and echoed ever since, is that a woman is a human being who inhabits a female body instead of a male body, often opposite a male body, and she usually has an experience about it. She is a biological and political and aesthetic being who is asked to be subjected to the man under patriarchy. Yet any given woman will transcend the category of femininity, however it is defined. Or you know what? Here's a more complete unraveling. The answer to the question of what a woman is not one. To say this, moreover, is specifically to deny that the answer is that woman is not one. It may be that, in some situations, it makes sense to understand a given woman or a given group of women as, say, plural and decentered. Yet to generalize this or any other view is to fabricate yet another reified concept of femininity. Too many forms of contemporary feminism appear unable to understand women who do not conform to their own more or less narrow vision of what a woman is or ought to be. The predictable result is the proliferation of accusations of exclusionism against this or that theory. What we need today, more than ever, is a feminism committed to seeking justice and equality for women in the most ordinary sense of the word. Only such a feminism will be able adequately to grasp the complexity of women's concrete, everyday concerns. What is a woman? What answer is useful? For feminists, when fighting for women's causes, there is an understanding of systems of power that harms groups of people in a very specific way. For Matt Walsh, to have a clarity informed by anatomy and tradition allows him to argue for the very structures feminists tend to fight against as natural and often holy. He asks women what a woman is, and he gets varying subjective answers. He asks conservatives, and they offer objectivity. They describe her like a farm animal. This is her flesh. This is her role she must not leave. What is a woman? What about who? Who is she? What does she want? What does she need to feel this separation of identity and sex and power a little less? She who is fighting against the status of second sex, who is not born but becomes. And look, Men certainly become too, but most men haven't interrogated gender in the same way women must. Feminists argue that under patriarchy, the man is assumed, and the woman is expected to fill in the gaps he leaves behind. She is from a gap in his side. She is what completes him. But while these patriarchal social structures become less vital for a woman to exist in public life, men have yet to grapple on what our sex looks like outside of power. What is a modern man? Ambivalence chopped and screwed? Actually, I'm not sure I'm the best spokesperson for men right now. That role should probably go to someone who isn't fighting lesbian allegations online. The thing to remember is this. The social role of a traditional woman was created to produce and maintain male power. Our science and construction of further distance came after. Moi again. In 1913, a British doctor named Walter Heap produced a particularly representative expression of the two-sex view of sexual difference. The reproductive system is not only structurally, but functionally, fundamentally different in the male and the female. And since all other organs and systems of organs are affected by this system, it is certain that the male and female are essentially different throughout. They are complementary, in no sense the same, in no sense equal to one another. The accurate adjustment of society depends on proper observation of this fact. Science has taken the place of theology or natural philosophy, and biology, as the science of the body, has been drafted into ideological service. Scientific truth, not divine revelation, is supposed to keep women in their place. The belief comes first. In order to maintain consistent societal structures and power differences, difference cannot remain a matter of mere aesthetics, but something political. Something with weight. The woman is the second sex. Our science proves it. Now, my experience is not that of a woman. I can say this confidently. Although mistakes do happen, I am perceived and treated as not a woman by the people in my life, by my doctors, by my state. Personal ambivalence does not change this reality. If one must be a woman in order to be a lesbian, then I am not one. Case closed. A lesbian is a woman who loves women, and a woman, in all its forms and all its contexts, does not include me. I yield my time. How would you define lesbian?
For levity, I'd say non-men loving non-men.
Am I a lesbian?
What are your pronouns? I never asked.
I don't think that sexuality is fluid. I think it is a very solid prison.
Part 3, love your enemy.
But when I was on mushrooms, the prison was a lot more comfortable.
Okay, I could just say that I'm a man and fully reject the whole thing based on that, but that's boring. Also, I'm worried about the accusations of secretly being a he-him lesbian, which will take some groundwork to properly address. Instead, we're going to start with the social construction of lesbianism, which is another book I read by Cecilia Kissinger. She's over, you can't see her, she's over here. In her work, which is situated in the 1980s, Kissinger argues for a series of different factors which compose lesbian experience and practice. Alongside lesbianism as a personal failure, a sort of psychological illness wrapped in guilt, the factors also explore lesbian relationships as sites for both political will and romantic desire. To quote the subject Sally, I think lesbianism can be a choice for some women, and I think for other women it isn't a choice. I think that some women are emotionally bound up in lesbianism and loving other women and almost instinctively reject the patriarchal values before they know what it is or experience it or whatever. And then there are other women who are not emotionally bound up in it, who come to it via their head, via their politics, I suppose. And I think both ways are valid. And I think it is about making choices.
If we're looking back into the Christian mindset, you can be same-sex attracted and not act on it. And then in that case, you would maybe be a lesbian, but maybe not. I think you can still be a lesbian and not act on it, but might as well act on it.
I want to paraphrase de Beauvoir. One is not born, but rather becomes a lesbian. No matter how hard we try, queer desire, let alone lesbian desire, is unable to escape the political sphere as long as it is pathologized as something separate and removable from the body by any system of power. Childs v. Salazar is only the most recent example of the legitimization of this severing. There is an attempt to convince you your attraction is merely aesthetic, something to be put on and taken off, something separate and removable like a tumor. Lesbianism as a choice, I'd argue, often follows the same fallacies with strikingly similar calls to action. In their work, which is situated in the 80s, leads revolutionary feminist groups Love Your Enemy, the debate between heterosexual feminism and political lesbianism, fiercely argues for feminists to do as Ariana does.
I will not apologize for getting the Ariana Grande line wrong. I'm clearly in a very lesbian time in my life right now. Thank you very much.
This severing of men, they argue, is what makes a woman a lesbian.
We do think that all feminists can and should be political lesbians. Our definition of a political lesbian is a woman-identified woman who does not fuck men. It does not mean compulsory sexual activity with women.
The group goes on to argue an essentialist perspective of heterosexuality, that it is all about power with no hope of pleasure, no hope of change or growth. While you have hope for escaping patriarchy, your boyfriend has no such opportunity, for he will perpetuate it through his body wherever he goes. A world without patriarchy must be a world without men. Now, I know men haven't been having like the best PR moment for a while, but can't we as feminists and feminist allies imagine a world where those who hold the same identities as former oppressors are still eventually welcomed into community? To fight against systems of power does not mean fighting against the existence of those currently holding some identity linked to power, but the systems of power which allow and enforce violence. When the political fight isn't about survival, can't it be about unity? Gay people are not fighting for a world without heterosexuality, nor are disabled activists fighting for a world with less ability, nor are Black activists fighting for a world without pale-skinned bodies or feminists for a world without men. It is all about power, and so at some points we do consider and enact separation. This is the goal of Love Your Enemy, to promote the necessity of lesbian separatism. Like with the reassertion of femaleness by Walter Heap through biology, Leeds revolutionary feminist group centers on anatomy pretty early on in their pamphlet to argue that a male body cannot be present for a woman to access power. This argument begins in the personal and the erotic.
Every act of penetration for a woman is an invasion which undermines her confidence and saps her strength. For a man, it is an act of power and mastery which makes him stronger, not just over one woman, but over all women. So every woman who engages in penetration bolsters the oppressor and reinforces the class power of men.
In the words of the Leeds revolutionary feminist group, heterosexual women are collaborators with the enemy. The group argues against the framing of enclosing instead of penetration, places gender at the central axis on which the complete oppression of women lay. With these arguments, with these works from the feminists of old, I'm always inclined to ask, what women? Who does she look like? Where does she live? On what background does she stand out the most? For what groups does arguing against this framing of the active enclosing of the phallus instead of a passive penetration benefit? Who are the women that are liberated by this enactment of feminist politics? I yield to Frankie Rickford's critique.
Standard sexist heterosexual sex with penetration as the unquestioned pinnacle is oppressive to women and tailored to men's interests, but that's not news and it's not contentious. The tragedy is that women's tentative attempts to explore and reveal and challenge standard sexual practice have been killed stone dead by two commandments, that if you do it with women, you're okay, and if you do it with men, you're out. If you engage in any form of sexual activity with a man, you are reinforcing his class power. Full stop. End of discussion. Even though sexuality is such a powerful and controlling force in all our lives, there seems to be no space left in the movement to seriously discuss it. It's not political, except when we use sexual choice to judge and condemn each other.
Is the price for a woman's utopia her pleasure? Must her partner be fixed in the position of oppressor? Of terrorist? Part 4. Can't you just choose something else? With any luck, we as feminists and their allies would have grown out of centering lesbianism as the correct way to engage in feminist action, whether that be with another woman or remaining by herself. We remain transfixed on an action, transfixed on an old world that will not change, but of course it already has, and we have too. I have straight friends, and some of them have boyfriends or husbands, and most of those relationships, from my perspective, tend to operate like partnerships. It is important to note this is anecdotal, and to be wary of men is often a worthwhile, vital project. The meme spreads because it's useful and true. All the good men are either taken or gay. It's easy to disavow hope, to give up on heterosexuality as a project entirely. I don't blame the women who do. They are not, however, automatically free from critique. To be a lesbian is not synonymous with giving up on men. For the experts I've grown close to, it has very little to do with men at all. In the words of my editor, it is not a rejection, but a release.
It was like I stopped forcing opposing magnets together. But I don't resent the other magnet for not belonging to me, nor was the core of my lesbianism coming from a choice to repel them.
But of course, men are still a problem, and women's desiring of men when it's not framed as an act of a gender traitor can still be kind of embarrassing. Heterosexuality always embarrasses me, begins Asa Saracen's diagnostic essay on heteropessimism. It's a misquotation in my eyes from Maggie Nelson's The Argonauts, devoid of context, plucked and dropped for a worthwhile but completely separate political project. Saracen criticizes Nelson for her amending of the line to "my heterosexuality always embarrasses me." I criticize Saracen for his erasure of the parentheses. In the context of Nelson's memoir, the line is used as a quick reaction to a lecture on photography from Lacanian feminist Jane Gallup. In her lecture, Gallup includes photos of herself mothering alongside photos of her child. Perhaps it's overly sentimental, autobiographical. The Lacanian comes up muddy, and Gallup loses her way because of her identity, because of her love. And now she's gushing all about it here in public in the academy. What follows is art critic Rosalind Krause's immediate destruction of Gallup's work. The series of events unfolds as such. Nelson goes to a lecture by a scholar she admires. The scholar is overly sentimental about her identity and relationships with her husband and child. Another academic immediately criticizes this choice to bring feeling and desire into a conversation with detriment to the subject at hand. The scholar Nelson admires takes on a new form. And in the midst of all this, she acknowledges a dark and quiet admission. Heterosexuality always embarrasses me. This embarrassment, though, seems to hold a glisten of envy that often exists intertwined with cringe. Gallup doesn't feel the need to consider the aesthetics of her sexuality and flaunts it openly. If only Nelson could treat her mild attraction to men the same way. If only she could be proud of her love in this way, loudly and flippantly, embarrassingly. An age-old question.
My entire state of being's changed because I've become my sexuality. Female, straight, wanting to love men, be fucked. Is there a way of living with this like a gay person? Proudly?
I think reading Nelson and Krause, they're not only embarrassed of heterosexuality, but embarrassed of their embarrassment. This is the shame felt, the shame that must be addressed by both the heteropessimist woman and the men she dates. If this is a systemic issue, that still doesn't mean our navigation and response begins anywhere but the interpersonal, no matter how defeating that may be. Nelson confides her embarrassment in us. Gallup loses herself in her love and in her motherhood, and in turn she loses any respectability she had as an academic. Just for a moment, I think she rebounded. Nelson's reaction to this embarrassment of love, at least as I see it, is the Argonauts itself. A beautiful project depicting the love between two people and their children. We love it, Saracen and I, because of Nelson's embrace of this embarrassment. Heterosexuality always embarrasses me, and yet, look at where the separation between us and them is weakest. Where is the overlap? At what point do we become each other? So, I disagree with Saracen's entry point into the fold of heteropessimism, but I remain intrigued by the diagnosis. Heterosexuality can be kind of embarrassing. For every loving boyfriend or husband, there are countless lackluster losers and exes. Heterosexuals start wars, build bombs, run the internet. Of course, there are a few evil gay guys joining the ranks of powerful evil heterosexuals now, but when a choice exists, why not give up on your quest to find the right guy with decent politics and go find a girlfriend instead? Lesbianism is defined by the possibility of a specific type of relationship, which we often view as merely not heterosexual. But wanting something doesn't mean you'll get it. Doesn't mean it's owed to you. And when what you want is impossible, a switch turned on or off, it's not hard to imagine giving up. Maybe the time for a good and valuable heterosexual relationship has passed. Maybe it never was. Maybe you know too much now. The response in Saracen's observations is that performative cringe she projects onto Nelson. The strategy to escape the shame is to acknowledge it, and through acknowledging, culturally separate yourself from the embarrassing action, the embarrassing party.
Their disavowals are akin to white people making jokes about stuff white people like. A connection that makes sense given the sinister intimacy between straight pride and white supremacist organizing. Yet, while trying to redeem oneself from whiteness or heterosexuality through performative distancing mechanisms might seem progressive, the reality is usually little more than an abdication of responsibility. If heteropessimism's purpose is personal absolution, it cannot also be justice.
This is the same ethos that produced the culturally queer. The holder of a dominant identity shifting their way further and further from the aesthetics of their identity, while their specific privileges and powers remain relatively intact and unharmed.
Aesthetics are important to me.
The embarrassment of envy comes from a very different place than the embarrassment of shame. Only one is looking for the escape from themselves. Low-Key I Chose to Be a Lesbian by Malavika Kannan opens with a confession of her attraction to men. Up until a pregnancy scare and a move to New York, Kannan lived a bisexual lifestyle, but has grown to exclusively use the label lesbian. In her own words, she chose the identity.
We are lesbian because, like, not to quote George Bush, but like we do not negotiate with terrorists.
Patriarchy is the terror. I want to terrorize it back.
We must stop the terror. Now watch this drive.
Lesbianism is the strategy. It is the tool to dismantle the master's house. Lesbian identity in Kannan's work and in much political lesbian discourse is less about love or desire and primarily focused on power and patriarchy. These conversations always come up in pamphlets and think pieces and conferences, but I wonder how much patriarchy really comes up in the hours my lesbian friends spend with their partners. How much value they observe in the lack of something, a stubbly face, of male sex, compared to all that is present in their girlfriends. As we continue the work of solidifying queer rights and legitimizing queer existence through various forms of activism, who is this work of lesbian liberation for? Who is a lesbian? Now, my first reaction is to side with Kannan and say that this distinction between lesbians and sapphics doesn't really matter. But whoever is part of a group necessarily changes when a group's work is done. The initial, most commonly defined suffragette movement within my country ended long before all women finished fighting for their vote. Of course, it's usually good to welcome others into the fight for your cause, but this doesn't alleviate the concerns of one expert I spoke to. The anxiety goes like this. You have women who choose to take up a lesbian politic, a lesbian way of being outside and separated from desire, a sexuality as a choice. And you have them spreading around this message that they chose to be a lesbian. And it's really hard, and they're not sure if they'll be able to do it forever. And suddenly, you've got a new, more malleable definition of what it means to be a lesbian for all lesbians. It was never really about love. It was about fighting the patriarchy. pissing off men. Conversion therapy might help. They've made their way back into your love life. You love her because she isn't a man. To be a lesbian is, in part, a negative identity. But don't worry, men. Eventually, a number will grow out of it.
It's easy for me, at 24, to hold out in my principles. I wonder what will happen when I get older. Our society has made it very structurally difficult for me to envision a life outside of partnership with a man. Unless a squillion of you buy my books or I get hit by an MTA bus and sue, I don't think I can ever raise a family by myself in New York, my chosen home. I don't blame those who can't hold out. Being a lesbian is not for the weak.
Conan's piece situates lesbianism as an exit strategy. Politics comes before erotics, if erotics comes at all, and the traditional lesbian with her exclusive attraction suffers for it. Conan, perhaps inadvertently, is pounding on the doors, desperate for respite, and what may be, in her own admission, a temporary inclusion. Lesbian sexuality cannot be about biology or love or devotion, because then she doesn't quite fit the mold. Sexuality must be political, must be explored politically, must be believed for good politics, must only exist within the realm of politics so her experience may be properly acknowledged and validated by her personal construction of a newly revisited lesbian identity, which she's now trying to convince us is useful. I apologize on behalf of myself and my editor, but we remain skeptics. I read through Conan's comments, and while there is some pushback, political lesbianism remains alive and well, growing like any other fringe ideology online. Forget about praxis. This is an anti-patriarchal theory that tends to drown love and beauty. We do think that all feminists can and should be political lesbians. It sounds like a commandment for disciples. Politics are framed to be more important than desire in Conan's argument. Feminism becomes a church at which we worship, where we show our worthiness. But this is not true. It has never been true, not when feminists and their allies were doing things. But in Conan's piece, to be an expert in feminism, to be a radical, requires a bit of privilege and a bit of youth. Like it's something our foremothers were in constant danger of growing out of. What does it mean, really, to be a terrorist to the patriarchy? How does rejecting desire, viewing desire as a negative attribute, a weapon, how does this get us closer to a feminist utopia, to queer utopia? How are we really addressing the problems of feminists by instating a new necessity, a new requirement, a new correct way to be a woman? It's the moi passage. It's pluralism. Is this argument for lesbianism as a required imperative for feminist politics not just self-policing with better optics? Am I allowed to paraphrase a woman who already did this work? Surely, a lesbian is, like women, a human being. But such a declaration is abstract. The fact is that every concrete human being is always in a specific situation. I think what annoys me most about this flavor of separatism is that we've already been here before. We already have some answers. Conan is not, along with anyone else, obligated to partake in relationships with men. Our structures and communities still heavily push for this outcome, sure, but it is through the work of our past radicals that the possibility of a richer single life becomes more possible. A woman can hold her own line of credit, buy her own house, in theory, move without the weight of an individual male's consideration. She must still contend with the structures, the sexist, the patriarchy, but she can manage. I would not call this woman a lesbian. On occasion, she's not even a feminist. Identity may uncover trends, but it does not correlate to politics. I think we should stop pretending an even semi-unified politic is a remote possibility for lesbians. I'm sorry, Conan. I want something better too. I worry that in Kanan's piece, her assertion of lesbian identity, despite desire, ends up discrediting her own and others' decentering of men. In my opinion, which is worth less than dirt here, I think it's a more radical act to acknowledge your attraction, but reject the desire anyway because of a personal ethic than it is to dismiss the possibility of male attraction entirely. A political chastity a la 4B, a refusal of a desire in response to its connection to patriarchy, will always carry more weight. A bisexual woman finds little value in her relationships with men. They keep letting her down. She stops dating them. She doesn't need to replace men with women. The need is not actually there. If you have the capacity for a same-sex relationship, go find one. You might get lucky, find what you were searching for. You might not. But maybe you'll live just like a lesbian. Maybe you'll fall in love. I'm confused about this discursive framework, confused about making sense of desires, intellectualizing the affect, bastardizing erotics into something rational that continues to support our political mythologies. I am interested in what is true, what is beautiful, and I get it. To be a lesbian is to be a political subject, but must that be how lesbians and all queer folk center self-perception as political subject? When and where in lesbian identity can we talk about love?
How would you define lesbian?
Well, you can take my active silence here as your answer.
Part 5, is loving not the point? There is sometimes a trend in marginalized circles of over-considering hypotheticals in order to create the boundaries of an identity. Can trans women be lesbians? What about non-binary people? What about trans men? How distant from maleness do you have to be in order to enter the fold? This is the other direction from bisexuality. For someone to be a lesbian, we usually just say they need to be a woman and they need to love women. Now we've moved on to they need to be a non-man and they need to love non-men. And this is fine, but I'm not ecstatic about this relationship to the negative. Maybe it's women and genderqueer people loving women and genderqueer people, gender diverse people. Are these borders comfy enough yet? Maybe we'll try a different hypothetical. Let's say, for the sake of argument, I claimed the identity of a lesbian who uses he, him pronouns. Is there a point at which you would question my identity? How many relationships with men? How many dates with heterosexual women? When does it become unhelpful to describe me as a lesbian? At what point would another word better reflect the ways I interact with others? Now, there are plenty of people who are not women, who do not love specifically or exclusively women, who nonetheless find worthwhile use in identifying as lesbians. Although I have critiques of the arguments Kanan uses to justify her own use of the term, I'm not going to, overtly tell her otherwise. I'm not going to hook her up with one of my guy friends, because that wouldn't be fair to either party. I worry about the political edge, the sociological borders, the temporality of sapphic erotics and historical dramas and Yuri and other genres of media. Although these are important factors to consider when we talk about identity, when we talk about how any queer person, any marginalized person moves through the world with the constant pressure to conform to the best of their ability, I think we get lost on why a woman calls herself, is, a lesbian. Lesbianism is not a moment, it's an identity, a state of being. She loves her, and she loves her dearly. And even though her might not always be her at some times, she loves her just the same. A lesbian loving lesbian. And after reading and writing so much about so much, I can't help but wonder, is loving not the point? Another note from my editor. Being a lesbian is pure freedom to me. If labels work for someone and they find the right one, it should feel right to them too. Lesbianism is not for the weak is one of the many signs it's not for Kanan. The dating pool is not for the weak. Sure. The stigma, discourse, and lesbophobia? Yeah. Lesbianism itself. I've never felt happier to be put in a box. I started reading The Persistent Desire because of an uncited quote in the Argonauts. Like any good recipient of a women's studies degree, I'd read the book before, but this year, it felt totally different. I sent the line to my editor, then set off to find the source of "To be femme is to give honor where there has been shame." It wasn't even about the essay anymore. There's a lineage, a responsibility to my friend, a desperate lunge to keep a beautiful thing from disappearing completely. Later that day, I found Michael Johnson's essay, Butchy Femme, and I sent another text. My editor wrote back, "I love being a lesbian, WTF." And in that statement, there is a recognition of lineage, yes, and progress, but also love. Oh, what an honor it is for her to love as she loves, to be femme and true to her desires, to know herself, and to want to know others. Sometimes I like to think of love as a process of constant understanding and care, of wanting to understand and care. To be in love makes that understanding and care mutual. Queer relationships always and already have a shared understanding of a point of pain. Shame, rejection, etc. The first implicit question, the first push for understanding begins, what life did you leave in order to exist at the same moment as me? Who left you and who made you? I was in awe the first time I heard my mentor speak. She talked about my university's writing program, how she didn't like writing all that much, how that wasn't a prerequisite for the emphasis. I Googled her, read all of her work in the following days. I didn't know you could write like that and still have it be academic. I transferred into her program the following week. I read and I wrote so much. She saw me as someone responsible, and in the summer, I watched my mentor's cats. I was invited to dinner. I learned about the message boards her husband helped manage in a past life. I wrote an experimental autoethnography about a lesbian newsletter situated in the 80s for my senior capstone project. I got to a point where I could hold my own in the conversations I wanted to have. My mentor was a big reason why. And now it's 9:30 at night on a Tuesday, and I'm reading Leslie Feinberg's Butch to Butch, a love song, and I can't help but to think of that mentor. I can't help but to think of my friends, of everyone who's ever joined in the construction of this project that is me. For Leslie, that was Al and her lover Jacqueline. Jackie. Another memory, softer this time, floats by. It's mine to keep. It was less information than I wanted. It turned out, however, to be the information I needed. It just took thinking about it for the rest of my life. We are too stuck in the present, too stuck in our discourses, too convinced our moment is unimaginable, that maybe queerness could have been about love in the summer of 2015, but the past decade has been hell. But I read the newsletters and I listened to the stories and I stared at a minuscule number of panels from the AIDS memorial quilt and I spoke and I listened and I listened and I still don't know the essence of lesbianism. I cannot tell you what it is to be a lesbian, but I can tell you what it means. I can tell you what it's like to be supported and loved by femmes, the lesbians in my life. Maybe that's what people are picking up on. Maybe my species is something that's loved.
Am I a lesbian?
Vibes, yes.
Am I a lesbian?
No. Although you have a lot of traits of a lesbian, I don't think you are one. Just like Princess Diana wasn't a lesbian, but she had a lot of traits that could have been attributed to lesbians.
Anything else to add?
No, I feel pretty good about that.
Part last. What is a lesbian? We are led to believe there is an end point to becoming, outside of death. And while we have rituals to open and close different sections of our lives, these rituals do tend to be finite with larger and larger gaps between them. We are told that for queer people, there is a point of singular understanding, then a point of singular decision, then singular implementation. You are closeted, then you come out, then you are out. This narrative allows a clean story arc, lends itself to a solid outline of lesbian experience. But it's also not really true. There's this paper by Shane Fallon, not situated in the 80s, called Becoming Out: Lesbian Identity in Politics. She makes a claim. Knowledge is only as important as it is useful, and our identities tend to mirror this fact.
Theories of knowledge serve to justify claims to specific knowledges. They produce and legitimate power. What comes to the fore, then, is not truth, but strategy.
When we understand identity as strategy, we are able to clearly see what it is doing. In lesbian circles, different strategies give rise to different desires. My lesbian friends who are in love do not often view their romance as some instrumental technology to damage the patriarchy, and yet this is what Conan explicitly advocates for. Lesbian identity as a strategy for love versus lesbian identity as a strategy for feminism. Feminism is still often of value amongst lesbians as a social group, progress certainly a goal, but the love is in and of itself. This is the difference between political lesbianism and romantic or sexual identity. In order to prove their case to others, political lesbians must spread their word, spread their gospel. They must grow in their ranks, and like Pharisees, they must keep their feminism as a religion to be set out with an expert's will. There are contexts where this closing off, where this separatism makes sense, and yet I'm a romantic. I like the worlds where my friends need not to prove their devotion to a definition, but only their girlfriends and partners. I know it's not always pragmatic, but I like it anyway.
We can see in the discussion of lesbianism over the past century or so several theoretical strategies and counter-strategies, all of which hinge on the ambiguity of nature and its various transmutations, such as God and psyche. These strategies have served either to justify homophobia and heterosexism or to defend against them. Ironically, the appeal to nature used by lesbians has also been used by those who would condemn them. Heterosexists have argued that God or nature condemns sexual activity outside of certain situations and formats. Some argue for sexual activity exclusively within the bounds of heterosexual marriage, but heterosexists do not uniformly envision sexuality as appropriate only for reproduction. Yet they are united in their belief that heterosexuality, whatever its particular forms, is natural and therefore privileged over lesbianism. The important question is not whether any particular theory is right about lesbianism and lesbians. Rather, we need to ask, so what?
Well, I see lesbianism as a label which encompasses how someone loves. And I don't think that's a decision. I don't think it's a choice.
True separatism doesn't stop at leaving your husband. It proceeds with paranoid rigor to purge the apartments of the mind of anything remotely connected to patriarchy. Desire is no exception. Political lesbianism is founded on the belief that even desire becomes pliable at high enough temperatures.
In my original defense strategy, I was going to define lesbianism and throw myself against the background to show you the stark contrast. I interviewed my friends only after I gave up on the endeavor completely, after I had essentially unasked the question, after I had read about Sappho's confirmed and theorized escapades, after I read Ruby Fruit Jungle and reread Audre Lorde. And all I can tell you about lesbians as a group is that they have a particular love. Or maybe not. Ask her who she is, how they love, and why, and you'll always have a better, more concrete answer than anything I can come up with. What is a lesbian? Come read my notes, come look at the stars, and you'll have as useful of an answer as I do. She exists at the borders, she loves at the borders, they do too. This is my answer. Fuzzy and queer. Although there is overlap between my own and a lesbian politics, I'm not within this fold of lesbian loving, of lesbian becoming. Ergo, I am not a lesbian. I rest my case. Shit!